There we go. We've been working on this for quite some time, and it kind of turned out to be a good thing that we had to reschedule last Tuesday's meeting, because had we presented then, we'd have been making changes because there were some more things that were changed by TEA late last week. So a lot of work has gone into this, and I think you will be pleased with what you see. And so Jessica is going to present this, and I'm going to turn the mic over to her.
All right, Chris, I'm going to need to share again.
All right, you can keep on sharing.
Okay. All right. Do you have my screen? Can everyone see? Okay.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So I'm going to begin here with by saying that we definitely have different folks who have stayed more heavily focused in components of this. So if you have questions at any point that I think may be better answered by campus principal or someone specifically that's been dealing with health protocol or operations or those kinds of things, I'll definitely direct over. But I have been nominated the communicator of our work here, and so I'm going to go ahead and begin. So we want to start with just our vision for this. I'm going to move this over. Can you still see my vision commitment? No? Okay. Give me 1 second. Okay, are we there now? So we wanted to start with talking just about the overall vision as we've been looking at this, because to be frank, it is very easy for to get to deal with some, drift away from what's most important, because things are constantly changing. And I mentioned that at our last meeting. Information is evolving at a rapid pace, and so we want to make sure that we are anchoring on what's most important. It can be very easy to rabbit trail and find ourselves chasing solutions to things, to problems that could change next week or tomorrow. And so what we're looking at today is, kind of what do we want to stay committed to? We want to ensure that all ACISD students have access to high quality instruction, whether they're in a digital environment or whether they're in a face-to-face environment or whether they're flip-flopping at any point during the year. We also want to stay committed to providing a rigorous TEKS-based instructional program for our students. Again, no matter which setting they're in, face-to-face or digital. We are accepting the challenge to expand our repertoire, and we know that in order to provide what we need to our students, we needed to invest significant time in understanding what this virtual model needs to look like to serve our kids. Our staff will incorporate digital learning tasks even in their in-person instructional routines, so that teachers and students can more seamlessly transition to virtual learning in the event that we do have an intermittent closure, because we need to, I think right now, accept that that could be possible. We want to prepare for fluid transitions as we plan for the unexpected. I just want to say that when we started this process, there was definitely a difference when you had teachers who had already been using things like Google Classroom or already been using some of these digital components. There was a more seamless move over into distance learning in those pockets because they already had routines with their students. So we're going to make sure that every grade level, every content, if students are in the building, we are constantly preparing them with the digital tools throughout the year, so that wherever they are, we're not dealing with that learning curve that we dealt with in the spring, which was so difficult on everyone. So we have had multiple contributors in decision making. The timeline of all of this has been very difficult because many of our decision makers have not been with us throughout the summer and even late spring. So we wanted to let you know kind of whose ears we have here. The first and foremost, we have to adhere to public health guidance from the CDC and the Texas Education Agency. They are providing guidance on an ongoing basis. We're actually waiting for the CDC, I believe this week, maybe next week, to put out some additional guidance. But we do, as a public institution, we have to adhere to those guidelines. And we do try to balance recommendations versus requirements because there is a difference. And so we've stayed very tuned into that, as well as local health guidance, because what we've learned is this pandemic looks very different in a large metropolitan city than it does in a small community like ours that didn't even see its first case until much later in the game. And so we want to listen to our local health officials as well, because what we're always hearing isn't always a perfect alignment with what's going on in our community. Of course, our district and campus leadership teams have been critical. We have had to call on our principals to be at meetings and Zooms, off contract time, because we've needed that time to plan. It's been a little harder to get our teachers because we're trying to honor and respect their summers. But I want to say that every time those principals call a Zoom meeting, those staff members are showing up because they want to be part of this process. They are not sitting at the beach on vacation. I mean, they might be, but in moments when their boss is saying, hey, I'm ready to talk to you, they're here. And so I've been super impressed with how many teachers are just wanting to be in the middle of this as much as possible. And our campus principals listen to their staff. And so they did have some small focus groups as the year was ending up in May and June. We also asked our principals to reach out because we feel staff is often more receptive to that principal they see every day than district level surveys. They get a little tired of our district surveys. So we have asked our principals to stay on the front lines with their staff and get information from them. And so some of them, they've done it in the form of formal surveys. Some of it, principals were calling every teacher. We've also tried to open a confidential human resources line for feedback in an email so that staff can have access to our nurse and our HR director if they have concerns about health. So we've tried to create several different avenues for teachers to reach out if they have concerns. We've engaged parents. I know we have a lot of parents listening in today, and we want you to know that, again, we understand how brutal the delays of information have been. And so the 2 surveys that we've sent out, even though we've pushed those, and those have been big efforts, there's so much more that we want to hear from you. And so we did collect 2 surveys with pieces of data, but it's often your questions that give us the information we need to keep going. And so the questions that parents submit through Proud Pirate Parent, through Facebook, through just asking their principals, through talking to board members, through talking to other teachers, that kind of feedback is important to us. Now, what do we have documented in survey format? We sent something out in May, which was a terrible time to send out for a survey, but we needed a preliminary read on where families were. And we knew nothing in May like what we know now. So we knew that that would change drastically. Preliminary surveys had a pretty low participation rate. We had about 30% of our families respond. At the time, 20% were interested in virtual, 40% were interested in face-to-face, and 36% were interested in hybrid. You can see there was a legitimate interest in hybrid, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that as we go, because that has been something that was of great interest to us. from the beginning, and is continuing to resurface itself just a little bit. We also sent out a survey on July 9th with our pre-enrollment survey. We got about 70% participation. We wish it were a little higher, but we also understand that we have some families that really needed another layer of information before they were even willing to commit to a decision. And so we're hoping that tonight's information, which will be posted later, will help give families a little bit more confidence to go ahead and make a decision. We also think we have some unreached parents who are not staying plugged into our communications. And that's where we have our staff already on the phone, calling those families that have not responded to the survey so we can get that face-to-face interaction. Our final results on that played out 57% face-to-face and 43% virtual. We did not put hybrid on the second survey because a big change rolled out from TEA about hybrid. It's not that they took the hybrid model away, it's just that they added something that we had to do. We were now required to provide 5-day-a-week school access in buildings to every student. And so a district of our size was really going to struggle with juggling 3 different models: a hybrid model, a 5-day-a-week model, and a virtual model. We can't easily divide our staff into those 3 chunks. And operationally, we felt like we would not be able to do anything well because we're trying to meet the needs of all of these different scenarios. And so at the end of the day, we had to choose quality of options over quantity of options. And so that's why on the second survey, we only put the hybrid model out. We did get a lot of feedback from some families that said, man, I really wish that hybrid model was still there. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that deeper into the presentation. I already mentioned the 3rd bullet point, so I won't repeat that. There are a couple of groups of people that I feel are missing from this. We want to hear more from our students, and we want to hear more from our community as we go. We did get a lot of feedback from our students on the way spring instruction went, and it was more anecdotal through teachers. We know that it was a struggle, and I'll speak to that just a little bit more again as we're more into it, but we will be engaging more of our stakeholders as we move forward with this in a more ongoing way. So we started with some guiding beliefs. These are some things that we believe to be true. Some of this has evolved over time. Some of this we've come to know over gathering information. The first thing that we believe is that COVID-19 will be present through the 2021 school year. We can't change that. We have to accept that and even let go of some of our hopeful wishing that maybe by spring things will settle. The reality is we must plan for the year. The next thing that we needed to come to terms with is that our health protocols would need to be redesigned drastically for the duration of the virus. We are going to be doing things in this school year that we never dreamt we would be doing. And honestly, we'll probably retire once this is all over. But we have to be ready to adopt some practices that might be different, might be uncomfortable, might not always be something we agree with, but we're trying to go from those key sources of information and how to guide our protocols. We also decided that we had to be able to we know that we are able to most effectively serve our students when they're in our buildings. There is no doubt. When kids are in front of us, we can read every emotion, we can read every bad day, we can read the immediate struggle with their learning. We know that. We can see it and we can respond to it. It's much more difficult when children are in a virtual setting. But we have to balance that with the fact that we have staff members and families who have legitimate fears about safety. The desire to educate children academically and the potential loss of some of that personal touch is something we had to be willing to kind of, as educators say, we have to find that balance between safety and academic need. And we have been listening to our staff members, and we recognize that many statistics are showing that children are handling this so well, but we know that we will have adults in our buildings that have to be able to teach those children. And so we must also consider our adults. We know that we need to make learning flexible so that we can adjust in the event that we have to go virtual at any point during the school year, because we don't have a choice, because there is a very real possibility that the virus could rise and the cases in our area could be so intense that we must go all virtual again, even once we've allowed students back into the buildings. So we want our learning to be designed flexibly to be able to go in and out. We also know that there were a variety of concerns about distance learning in the spring from staff and parents, and we must make adjustments to improve this. We had some teachers who I think you could put on a stage, and they can and they will be able to help other colleagues in the profession know how to provide quality virtual instruction. But what the majority of teachers across the nation experienced this year, and I mentioned this at the last board meeting, is they experienced what we call crisis teaching. They were trying to balance their own personal lives, children in their homes, while they were also teaching 30 to 40 to 120 students. And so it was a difficult situation. We did not have time to train staff. We did not have time to make sure that they had the tools that they needed to meet those very different needs. We provided a lot of support, and I am so proud of the work that our instructional educators performed in the spring. I mean, it was something that we truly did turn on a dime, but it was not something that we would sustain long term. We now are positioned to be able to do some things differently, and I'll talk more about that as we go. We wanted to talk about attendance. This is going to be another strange, odd, different thing this year, but at the end of the day, district academic goals and student achievement are linked directly to students' attendance. Attendance will be taken daily during virtual learning to ensure that students are actively engaged. During virtual instruction, students will be expected to participate and fully engage as communicated by the teacher to receive attendance credit. It will not be like the spring, where we had just we had a pass with attendance. It was very loose. And so this will be different. TEA has given the directive. We will document attendance daily, no matter where the students sit. And so we'll go into more detail on that as we go. We want to make sure that you know what the requirements are. What are we just kind of bound to, because we don't get to make all of our own decisions. There's some things we're bound to, and then there's some things that we have flexibility in. So one thing we have to do is implement a calendar that includes the 75,600 minutes. We do that every year. We have to provide for our face-to-face instruction. So we've built that calendar and it's set. I will say something that came out last week is that if our local officials required that we have a stay-at-home order, we would get to count those virtual days as part of the minutes. So as far as, and I know we don't always like to talk about funding, but if we don't have funding, our doors are not open. So sometimes we need to talk about funding. If we do not have the funding to keep those doors open, that's an issue. So we were thankful that TEA said, if you have a local order, we will continue to fund you. That was something that set us at ease. We have to provide access to face-to-face instruction all 5 days a week for pre-K through 8th grade. If a parent says, I want my child in the building all 5 days a week, we must honor that. We did not think we were under that guidance in June. We had different guidance in June, but as things evolved, this became a directive. We have to provide face-to-face at least 40% of the week for grades 9 through 12. This is new as of the 17th. This change happened on Friday. TEA said, okay, at high school, we'll allow you to go to a fully hybrid model. We'll allow you to we'll exempt you from the full 5-day-a-week calendar. And I'll explain more later why that is such a safety concern at the high school as opposed to the other 3 campuses. And I'll get into that. I will say a decision to move that direction would require the board's support. It would require board approval. We must require 100% virtual option for families. So families, if you are not comfortable and ready to send your children back for the school year, you will be guaranteed a 100% virtual option that you may choose for the year, that you may choose for a 9-week period, and yes, more on that. We must take daily attendance for face-to-face and virtual. We must provide students access to TEKS-based state mandated curriculum. I know a lot of people expressed that the spring felt like a lot of review. It didn't feel like kids were getting new exposure to content and information. We will provide a plan to the state that shows that we will be providing new content and material throughout the year using our scope and sequence. We must use a grading procedure for all students consistent with those that we used prior to COVID. No pass fail. We will hold to a consistent grading procedure, and it has to be the same whether you're virtual or whether you're face-to-face. And then we have to choose an attendance method. These are essentially, these two words were used to define the type of funding model we will choose. I'll define these in a little more detail shortly, but basically you'll hear these two words. We're trying not to use them often, but just in case you hear them, synchronous is two-way, real-time, live instruction. Kid checks in at the beginning of the day. They have a schedule they follow that's live from 8 to 4 or whatever the time frame is. It's real-time, it's live. This is not allowed for pre-K2 because it's acknowledged that keeping a child on a device for that long seems completely unethical and quite frankly impossible. The other option would be asynchronous, which allows the student to receive instruction that is not required to be live and real time, although it could include some live and real time instruction. It has more flexibility built into it. So these are some of the allowances. So I just gave you the list of you must do. Now I'm going to tell you some things TEA is allowing us to do if we'd like to take advantage of it to promote safer transitions. All of these things are about giving us some options to make it a safer opportunity this year for people who choose face-to-face. Districts have been given the opportunity to choose remote-only instruction for the first 4 weeks of the school year, with the option to extend an additional 4 weeks if we get board approval. We chose 3 weeks, which has us coming back right after Labor Day, because at the time, that's what we were allowed to do. That was like 2 weeks ago. And then this changed, and they said, we're gonna bump it to 4. And then we're also going to give you the opportunity to add 4 more if your board says that you can do it. So we chose not to make any hasty moves on this. For right now, we're sticking to the 3 weeks that we had told families. Just know that, I mean, this will be an ongoing conversation with our school board, with our staff, with our principals, because if we were to see increases in cases, it might be very difficult to have people with the children in the building. So these are the things, adults. So these are the kinds of things that will be an ongoing discussion. Beyond that, it would have to be a local order. So beyond those 8 weeks, it would have to be a local order. By the way, these 8 weeks are only from the first day of school. So we can't spread our 8 weeks over the school year. We would have to take them from the first day. Parents may choose to go from face-to-face at virtual at any time, but we'll ask that they follow established procedures to transition. So if a student is currently attending face-to-face instruction, but maybe the family decides that this really no longer is feeling like a good option, they can choose to go ahead and move back to virtual. We'll have a procedure for that. The only thing we are limiting, and TEA is giving us this allowability, is students can't choose to go from virtual back to face-to-face unless it's the end of a grading period. And I think you can imagine why that would be such a logistical problem. If we had a constant swinging door of kids coming back into face-to-face, There would be no way to balance classes, to make sure our staff is appropriately allocated. So we need time to be able to make adjustments if kids are wanting to come back into the building. That's why we have a 2-week window prior to the first day of school where parents will need to declare this. Lastly, high school campuses only may choose a hybrid only model of face-to-face and virtual to reduce the number of students on campus at one time. So here's the difference between your K-8 and your high school. K-8, with the way certifications work, have the ability to keep students in a pod and not move them to multiple locations. They can keep them with a small group of teachers, and that means they're only exposed to that group of kids and that instructional teacher. High school campuses, in order for students to be receiving the instruction they must have the teacher that's certified in the course, which means we were going to have no choice but to run an 8-period day with kids transitioning all over the building all day long. And that is very hard to control, especially with limitations on social distancing. So we will be proposing this particular item to the board to consider for the high school, because we do feel that a hybrid only model at the high school, at least in the beginning, would be a smart, safe choice to take. It doesn't mean that we can't bring students back on full time once we feel like we've got good procedures in place and the virus is under control, but this would build in another layer of safety to protect staff and students, and we'll discuss that a bit more as we go. Board members, I do encourage you, if you're not already, and I meant to say this at the beginning, if you have a question as we're going through and you want to jot it down, we'll definitely come back to questions. I know I'm just talking through, but it's a lot of information and we might get to your questions. So if you want to just make sure you're taking good notes with questions, we'll definitely come back to that. Or holler and stop me and we'll come back to it. So what will this look like in ACISD? So we've broken this into some phases, and you'll see right now we're in phase 1, July 20th to August 14th. Campus leaders and teachers are preparing for the start of the school year. We're focusing on building good safety protocols. We're focusing on building good instructional plans for virtual and face-to-face learning. A lot of work is happening here right now on these areas. Everything right now is in draft stages and really ready to be at least published in draft form. In case we have more changes, we'll have the opportunity to do that, but they're ready. The next phase will shift over August 17th, when we will bring students back on to virtual learning for the first 3 weeks to help staff and students transition back to face-to-face. As of now, that would come to an end on September 4th. Phase 3 would begin after Labor Day on September 8th, when in-person learning would begin, unless we were otherwise ordered by local officials, or if the board felt strongly that we needed to extend an additional 4 weeks, or of course, Mr. Patek. And that would be related to health concerns. That would be the only reason we would extend, is because we have health concerns about bringing people back on staff.
Ms. Robbins, I have a question on that, and this may be something we can discuss lately or obviously or another time, or you guys may not have the answer of what it would look like at this point. But on phase 2, would you be bringing teachers back into the classrooms for them to be virtual in their classrooms and also help get prepared for the face-to-face option?
Yes, ma'am. And that is not anywhere in this PowerPoint, and I'm glad that we have notified our staff of that, but that is a good thing for people to hear, I think. We do feel like teachers can, if teachers have access to all of their instructional materials and they have access to, colleagues as they need them, that we can safely socially distance our teachers in their classrooms, provide, common entrances and exits, make sure that we have good sanitation practices, make sure that we follow all guidelines related to anyone who's been exposed to COVID, And that would allow us to bring our adults back in the building without overloading our space. And so, yes, that is absolutely part of this phase 2 plan. There may be some unique situations where someone may need to work virtually, and we'll work with our human resources department and our principals and Mr. Posak to determine where that may be a necessary situation based on COVID interactions or those kinds of things. Does that answer your question there? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and define these, and then we will kind of phase these words out. We just want to make sure everyone's at least heard them because they are flying all over the state of Texas right now. And so we want to make sure that you've all got, exposure to the language that's being used. So again, I mentioned synchronous and asynchronous is what TEA is requiring that we choose one of these two models based on how we're going to fund our school year. Synchronous is the two-way real-time live instruction between teachers. This type of instruction includes teacher-supported work time and scheduled time and online tests. This could not be used solely for pre-K2. I mentioned that. Asynchronous instruction refers to self-paced instruction where students engage in learning material on their own time. They're interacting intermittently with the teacher. There is pre-assigned instruction and practice with remote formative assessments on their learning management system that will track progress. ACISD is bringing something called Seesaw. Live Oak will bring Seesaw on board for pre-K2, and Google Classroom will continue to be utilized for grades 3 through 12. Students will also watch pre-recorded videos of instruction with guided support. Now, I do want to say with the asynchronous, we have to choose one or the other. The thing that makes asynchronous so appealing is we can choose an asynchronous model and still include synchronous instruction. So we can say we want a more flexible asynchronous model, but we are going to offer live real-time instruction as a component of that asynchronous instruction. So we want to make sure that ACISD students are being taught by ACISD teachers and that they are getting that personal face-to-face component, but that they also have the flexibility with parents having different work schedules, with times that kids tend to work better during the school day, to be a little bit flexible with their schedule if they need to be. And so that is something that makes the asynchronous model the most appealing. Now, blended learning is another phrase that will be used, and we'll use this in reference to our face-to-face instruction. This is something that will help us support teachers and students if we need to transition to virtual in case we have to close. And so if we had a situation like we did in March around spring break where it was, okay, we have to go to virtual learning, kids already have routines, people already have things down, they know how this works. So a blended learning environment would combine online tools with classroom strategies and instruction. So looking more specifically at phase 1 and preparing for reopening, we've been spending a lot of time focusing on safety protocols. And what I want to say about the safety protocols is when we talk about putting these out in draft form, what will not happen is we see this as the baseline. We will not back off of any of these safety protocols. The only thing we could envision doing is finding additional safety measures that would help make teachers and staff more safe, because frankly, new ideas are rolling out all the time that are helping us go, yeah, we could do this, and this would make things a little bit safer. So this is the base, right? These are the things we will do. We will make sure that students and staff have a self-screening protocol. Required temperature checks will be taken as needed. We will have immediate relocation of students who exhibit symptoms, and staff really. There will be notification of positive cases following protocol and confidentiality. So we will not announce names of people who have COVID, but we will be able to inform parents that a child in the classroom or teachers that a student in your classroom, so that we can make appropriate adjustments as needed. We will be limiting visitors on campuses right now as long as the epidemic is presenting such a concern, and we'll have virtual meetings for adults when it's appropriate. We will require face coverings. We did talk about how with pre-K, like pre-K 3rd grade, sometimes that face covering, because of the age appropriateness, can become more of a distraction and more problematic, even in health, than having one and not having one. Those administrators will be working very closely with their teachers and their families to determine the best course of action in that. We want to make sure we're keeping all students safe, but we also will ensure that face coverings are addressed age appropriately at that pre-K 3 level. Sanitizers will be at all main entrances, classrooms, and common areas. We'll have hand washing requirements. There will be access to disinfectant wipes for all high touch areas. Teachers will have lots of different spaces that have those disinfectant wipes and things that can help them do quick wipe downs if they need to be able to. We will limit the use of shared supplies. It's very common for us to have community supplies in our classrooms. We've determined very quickly that must cease to exist to the extent possible. So we will really work hard to limit shared supplies. Daily campus disinfection will happen in common spaces. Additional cleaning measures will be in place for areas exposed to the virus. You will get much more detail on this when we release the protocol, but we just want to make sure we're hitting the big highlights for this. Social distancing will be in place to the extent possible. That "to the extent possible" is a phrase that we hated to have to add in here. But when when the ability to limit our capacity on our buildings was removed, it put us in a position to not be able to guarantee perfect 6-foot social distancing everywhere kids go and everywhere adults go. So that's always going to be the first line of action. But in the event that is not able, where we're not able to completely fulfill that 6 feet, we will have lots of other measures in place. We will make sure that there's no touch entry between classes. Water fountains will be covered up, and we will replace with water bottles that will be placed in classrooms. There will be reduced transitions at pre-K 8 because they will be contained in smaller pods that aren't moving around all day, and that reduces the number of interactions. And we would like to recommend the hybrid model at high school in order to reduce capacity at 9-12. So then what does preparation for sound virtual learning practices look like? First, we had to ensure that pre-K-12 teachers have access to a learning management system that can house and track student progress. Fortunately, Google Classroom was something that we at least learned to use in the spring. Some people really learned to master it. Some people said, sign me up for more training. And so we have a large spectrum of where people fall on that, but we are able to provide access to much higher quality training for the fall and already have plans in place for that. We did have to purchase an LMS for pre-K 2. TEA is providing training for principals about how to see this instructionally. They are the instructional leaders on their campus. And so TEA has put together several different modules of training that our principals are signed up for, that will provide them with tools to drive remote instruction. And so it'll deal with things like, what does effective online learning look like? What does active engagement look like when a kid is on a computer screen? How do you connect to others and be a model of effective structures? And so they will be getting some training that is just for them specifically as instructional leaders. We're updating our inventory of online resources for ACISD teachers and students, and we're also providing all necessary digital tools to students and teachers so everyone will be fully equipped. I have to say this, that we have made it a priority in the way that we look at this next year to ensure that no child does not have access to virtual learning because they do not have the right technology in their household. We will close the technology gap. There is no question about that. We have a process in place to deal with households who do not have internet. And so we will ask that you contact your campus when you have that concern. But this has become, Norm's department has spent extensive time making sure that we're going to have, that there will be no digital divide. And that is a huge concern in districts across the state right now. That will not be a concern in ACISD. We found a 2-day digital learning conference that could be personalized for our district. And so we are excited about it. We got the information. Principals felt like it aligned with concerns that their staff has mentioned. And so we believe the researchers that are behind this particular training these are people we read all the time. And so we were pretty excited that they were pumping out information on a distance learning playbook. And it breaks into modules, you know, how a teacher tends to their own self-care. I don't know if you checked in on a teacher during the spring, but it was hard on them emotionally, physically. They did not know how to turn off. Many of them worked into the night. And so we want to make sure they get a little bit of that self-care piece. It gives them some information around the first days of school, how to build teacher-student relationships when you have a virtual classroom, how to build credibility at a distance. I mean, so much of us rely on humor and close interaction and body language and all of those things to build relationships with our students and build credibility. And when that's not present, you have to figure out how to replace that. So there's a specific module for that. How to make sure that there's clarity at a distance, that a teacher's being clear about what they need and not just putting assignments up and hoping students can, you know, interpret the information. We're going to make sure that there are engaging tasks and it's not just rote bookwork. You know, making sure that kids have things that are engaging their mind in a new and different way. They will get some training on planning instructional units for distance learning and how to give feedback and how to assess and how to grade in this whole new, you know, land. And then of course, just some above and beyond distance learning and otherwise. So I think this is going to be good for all of us. We'll all be on this learning journey together, and we looked in the budget to determine if we could afford to pay teachers just a little bit to come a couple of extra days early. And this is something that we're prioritizing with federal funding. Fortunately, we had that available to be able to use. So we can't technically require every single teacher to attend this training, but turnout has been fabulous. And when you have a majority of your staff on board, then all of that trickles out to the group. So we're excited about that one. So phase 2 is what we will be moving into. This is what TEA refers to as the transition period. So from August 17th to September 4th, all students will begin daily online learning with components of live and/or recorded interactive virtual instruction. Once students return to buildings, the virtual models described will continue for those who choose to remain virtual. There are some roles and responsibilities that come with this. Parents, we know that this 3-week virtual period of time is not what many of you wanted. And we know that this was hard on some of your families. I have high schoolers in my own family. I know how difficult this process was on households. And so we're really looking at how do we shift that so that so much of that burden of responsibility does not fall on families in a way that feels just very uncomfortable. And so, but there are some things that we need to do as a partnership, staff, parents, and students. We want parents to help us establish a designated workspace. Like, let there be a place, let there be a spot where that student is able to say, this is where I do school. Do your best to support a positive learning environment, you know, help that child figure out how to reduce distractions. It was hard for me to tell my high school brother that he must put his cell phone on the dresser so that he could work on this assignment and get this knocked out. But at the end of the day, that routine for him made it to where he could more effectively roll through what he needed to do. So helping them determine what those things are that they need to do to be able to reduce distraction. I'm not saying every child needs their phone removed. I'm just saying for this situation, it was helpful. So we need that support. We need help in learning, you know, teaching how to reduce those distractions. And support within the remote learning environment. Instruction will be designed to ensure that students continue learning at a pace of the ACIC scope and sequence, with the classroom teacher taking the lead in instruction. That is of no question. So I'll differentiate a little bit elementary campuses. Does someone have a question?
I was just going to ask, and maybe this is something that we can talk about later too, or it may be on your slides as well, is the tutoring. So if these students are registered for face-to-face, then obviously they'll still have face-to-face tutoring. But if they're registered for virtual, will they be able to go in for face-to-face?
Ah, okay. So when you said tutoring, I was thinking virtual tutoring at first. So,
Well, and we can, and that may be something that evolves over time, but I'm just thinking when you go back to your previous screen, it just kind of made me think of if these kids are already virtual, but they still need that interaction with face-to-face or hands-on in that point, how are we?
So yeah, that's good. So we have already discussed, of course, there will be office hours posted for some virtual tutoring. And I'll tell you, in some cases, I know teachers that were fabulous virtual tutors on Zoom. They'd log in with the kid on Zoom, explain a concept, we were good to go. But I do know what you're saying, that there may be situations where kids need more of a like face-to-face kind of tutoring. We have not discussed that. I envision that there could be some logistical issues with that because these teachers have kids all day. But could there potentially be like a window of time where kids could come in for some tutoring? I'm going to put that on the list for discussion.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
But that's fine.
I have a question, Jessica. And do we have students in our school district who struggle with being in a virtual environment because of different special needs? And how are we going to meet their needs during these 3 weeks that we are all virtual?
So this is, and Ms. Lutman, if you want to chime in on this, I encourage you to unmute and chime in on what that looks like. I can speak to it generally. I don't know if she wants to try to expound on that for her. I'll speak. Go ahead.
Our special ed teachers, our life skills teachers, work very carefully to make sure that each assignment, each packet, each lesson is based on each individual child. There isn't a lot of blanket across the board type lessons. We individualize them based on their IEP. We are also working with our OT, which is our occupational therapist, our physical therapist, to see if there is a time when they can come into the building, because they almost have to be. Physical therapy is one-on-one. It really doesn't work virtually. but we are working with them to see if there is a chance we'll be able to do physical therapy in a building on a very, very limited scale. Our
Right, and there's some
speech-
occupational, I'm sorry, there's some occupational therapy that would probably also require that.
Yes, yes, which is why we are working with her also. Our speech pathologists are working on going virtual. And so they will be able to provide some virtual lessons. And then they will also be available to do regular lessons. So even when the kids come back, we will still have our virtual speech lessons for the kids whose parents elect to keep them at home. And we are going to continue to use our diags. We'll continue to do Zoom meetings so that we are not bringing everybody together for a while. And we will be bringing children in for testing individually, one-on-one, probably starting next week, so that we can start working on our backlog to get those children tested and get those ARDS processed and done.
Okay.
We are also going to have the diags do regular either Zoom meetings or videos explaining how accommodations look, different ways to do things, just so the kiddos or their parents could watch those and maybe get some other ideas.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and break down just for our elementary campuses in a little bit more detail what this might look like. So they would receive a recommended schedule with an instructional lesson plan. So the parent could see like a quick look almost of what a day, or even a week, what a week should look like. And that will be housed in Seesaw, specifically for Live Oak. Fulton will have some sort of kind of daily or weekly plan as well that they've been working on. Direct instruction will be followed by independent practice. So remember that direct instruction could come in the form of a video. It could come in the form of a live instructional piece or a video that a child watches. We are going to ask that students check in virtually by noon each day, and they will need to show some kind of progress, and there will be detail on that. Attendance will be recorded daily. There will be scheduled tutorials and small group instruction and intervention and enrichment as needed. These are currently scheduled for Zoom. I do think the more that I think about this, Michaela, I think part of this too is like when you bring new kids into the environment that you're trying to kind of keep contained for safety reasons, there might be some safety issues with adding different groups of kids, but we can talk more about that. Lessons will be recorded so they can be accessed at a later time. All lessons and student work will be shared through the student's LMS, either Seesaw or Google Classroom if you're at Fulton. Students should expect a minimum of 180 minutes of work time daily. And then students will also receive daily instruction through videos and or activities for PE, fine arts, library,
Jessica. Just
yes.
For those that are doing virtual and let's say they miss a day or two, they don't check in, is there going to be any kind of detention or Saturday school to make up those minutes?
So campuses definitely have a procedure. It would be as if they were absent from school. So campuses have a procedure and they will follow those same guidelines this year with how they're documenting attendance. Each one handles it a little bit differently, but they have those scheduled meetings with families. They have those, we are required by law to do some very specific things with the courts. And the way we handle that. So that will be pretty heavily monitored, just like it would if we were face to face. At this time, I don't believe anything like Saturday school is scheduled or on the books, but I think principals are always looking at ways to be able to, they're always looking at ways to be able to, you know, encourage that attendance at different levels. So we can definitely add those to the list of things to think about. This is just, it's a little hard to see, but we just wanted to show you an example. Like at Live Oak, for example, this is something that Ms. Pullen has been working on with her staff, and it shows, you know, what the daily practice extension activities would be. It would show the parent like what's going to be happening over the course of a week. It gives little breakdowns of the lesson. And remember, these are lessons not that the teachers deliver, not that the parent is delivering, but lessons that might be provided through the instructional program or by the teacher in a video. And so those are there. She also has a place where if a child is an EL or an English learner or gifted and talented, or that we would provide some extension activities or supports, and they would have that for each subject. This is just a sample of what a schedule might look like at Fulton for a virtual learner. So like they might do a responsive classroom check-in and a social emotional learning lesson from 8 to 8:20, and then a math lesson with some teacher modeling and guided practice. And so you can just see, it looks much like a daily routine, like what they would follow if they were in a school building. And you know, they would work through those pieces to get that instruction. These things would also be recorded so that that's, you know, available, but we're wanting to make sure that kids get that personal connection. Something often that many of the online programs can't offer is that daily connection with a staff member who knows the child. And so we're really seeking to fill that goal, you know, to meet that goal with what we want to offer. This is a sample, you're not intended to read through, but I just wanted you to see a seesaw lesson structure. Ms. Pullen provided us with a screenshot. And so like a child, even a young child, you know, would get this piece would be read to them. So there would be like this little play button to be able to listen to the lesson. And it would have icons like take a picture of your page as you're doing this, or tap the microphone to record yourself. Little things that just help prompt them to use through an activity. Now, this is, we're going to try something that's a little weird in a large Zoom group, but I'm going to see if Dinah can share her screen. We had some teachers that really just on the spot, we reached out to them and said, would you be willing to give us a couple of like live recordings of what it might look like if I were in, say, a kindergarten math classroom, or we also sampled some folks at the secondary level. And so we had several samples submitted, and we're actually going to post those, and we'll move on to middle and high school. Some of this will sound very similar. Students will receive, again, a recommended daily schedule, opportunities for a blend of live and or recorded instruction, followed by independent practice, daily attendance requirements, scheduled tutorials and interventions, small group instruction and teachers throughout the day, and then teachers will have office hours at the end of the day that will allow students to receive support with independent assignments and tutoring. We do want to note, this has been a big question that's come through. When we are all virtual, we will do the best we can with our courses that require hands-on. Some of our CTE courses that you see that really like culinary or like welding or some of these things, we will just do the best with what we can when we're under required virtual closure. But electives that require in-person labs and hands-on will be limited until students return to the buildings. Once that happens, some electives cannot be offered in a virtual setting. And so if a student is planning to participate in virtual learning for the remainder of the semester, and they're currently registered for a hands-on elective course, a schedule change is going to be required. And so that's something parents I know will have to decide with their students. You know, if being in the building, if they want that particular hands-on course, they're going to have to be in the building for some of that time. And so we hope that a hybrid model would allow people to feel more comfortable making that decision. The requirements to be counted present and progressing, the students, you'll see the minutes go up here, spend 240 minutes each day on school instruction. Students will be encouraged to work between 8:30 and 4 daily. They must complete at least one subject assignment by 12. Students will attend teachers' live instruction when scheduled or live tutorials when needed, and they'll be available during the day between 8:30 and 4 to assist students. They will update instruction daily. We're encouraging virtual learners to follow a schedule below, but there will not be designated periods for the secondary schedule. It won't be like they go to first period, then second period, then third period. It's not a live schedule. We're just recommending a routine that we think would be, a healthy routine for students to use, knowing that that's when their teachers will be at work. That's when their teachers will be available to take their questions and to do some of that tutoring. And so we're encouraging a schedule that more closely aligns with kids who are in the hybrid, who are in the building. So these, quite frankly, are things that, our staff has put together before we've had some really deep level training. And so we hope that we'll continue to enrich and give them tools that they feel comfortable sharing and things that they feel comfortable using that can really help continue to build on what we have. And so just wanted to give you a couple of specific teacher models and just some kind of, where we're starting with this. So there are, of course, always other programs and services that we're thinking about. Alicia has already elaborated at length about special education. And so I believe she denoted all of this in her portion and the question that she got from Ms. Randall. 504 is parents now will be able to access their child's accommodation plan through Skyward Family Access. They'll use the portfolio tab just like they do with report cards, and of course we'll continue to have support and open dialogue with our special program facilitators. We're working on a page that can go, we're really working to build right now an ACISD page specific to COVID that will give kind of house, it's like we've been pumping all this information out, but we have not been housing it in one consistent, easy to get to location. So we're really working on that. It's going to take us just a little bit to get it to where we want it to be, but we're working on kind of an easy to navigate page where you can go link straight from the home page when you click on the COVID button, and we'll have things there like resources specific to our special programs. With ESL, we'll continue to offer direct bilingual support to our ESL families through our ESL teachers. And we have some, different ways that we want to be able to support this population, which can be very tricky when we do not have our language learners in the building. So we'll keep working on that. Gifted learners will receive services through Zoom if they choose to go virtual. Dyslexia is probably one of those very complicated services to provide in a setting that is not face-to-face. And so we are highly going to encourage face-to-face for our students with dyslexia. We really did struggle with providing Zoom, and we did in the spring. We had dyslexia teachers Zooming with kids, even one-on-one, and it was very difficult to provide that service because it relies so much on enunciation of the teacher and the student. And Zoom makes it very difficult to exercise some of those pieces. And so we are going to heavily encourage face-to-face. We do understand there will be some parents who are not comfortable with that. And so those students will have to be present probably in a live Zoom setting in the classroom. That will be one of the few asynchronous things we really will need to do, because those teachers won't have extra slots in their day to serve just their distance learners. Their distance learners will need to be present during the class period to receive that service. And it will have challenges. We want to be very upfront about that, but we want to also continue those services regardless. So we're going to do the best we can to accommodate that. We're looking at some face shields that give a different kind of protection and allow teachers and students to see one another's mouths, and so we're working on that. We do recognize the extreme need right now for mental health services, especially with students finding out that there may be more closure. The counselors will be providing a safe place for online and virtual guidance for staff and students. Communities and schools will continue to provide support to all students and families with basic needs and community resources. ACISD has continued to partner with outside organizations for telehealth services, which have been incredibly helpful with UTMB, Bayview, and the University, A&M Corpus. Guidance lessons will be offered virtually through some different platforms. And at the high school, we will continue to provide information on graduation, post-secondary opportunities, FAFSA, and we'll use our different, communications, text, email, websites. And then we'll also provide students with access to CCMR opportunities to support their future ready learning. Technology, I've already spoken to this. Students who do not have access to a device at home will have the ability to check out a Chromebook. We will want our devices to be one-to-one. In the fall, in the spring, we tried to do maybe 1 or 2 devices at home. So if a child has a device that they're comfortable using, we encourage them to use that if they can bring it back and forth to school. But we would like to make sure every child in the household has a device. It would be something though where if they're using their own device, they need to be able to have it at school as well. So you would have to be comfortable sending it back and forth. And then we use iPads for pre-K 2. We ask you to notify the campus if you do not have internet services. Norms department is currently working to create a technology telephone hotline to provide parents and student support, as well as a page. This will be another thing on the COVID page that will allow parents to submit a work ticket, and then we'll have some troubleshooting links for folks who want to just handle it themselves and just need a little extra support. But we want to make sure that there is a phone number where parents can call when they need to talk to someone. It will be during working hours, business hours, but they can always, submit a ticket and someone can get back to them otherwise. All students are expected to follow state and local testing requirements. As of now, TEA is giving no hope that they might back off of STAR requirements, and so we will expect and plan for that for now. And if we conduct testing locally and a student is virtual, they will have to complete that testing at home as well. They will have access remotely. Ms. Adams announced today through P3 that school supplies will be provided this year. There is no reason to purchase school supplies. We are going to have that available for students where there's a need. And so there's no reason for you to add that expense right now. We've got a grant for 1 more year that can help us take care of that. The final phase, and this is the phase that of course will continue to evolve a bit. I want to tell you that even today when the commissioner spoke, they just released official training and guidance on the asynchronous model. So we will continue to tighten up our own procedures on that process. But there's more information that's coming out, and just tonight they will receive the training on asynchronous. So we're giving you these preliminary, plans for that, but they will only strengthen and get better and tighten up as we get more of that direction. So the current goal for phase 3 is to allow families who are ready to return students to campus September 8th for face-to-face instruction. We'll continue to monitor guidance from our officials regarding the current health conditions related to the virus as we move forward. Once students are back in the buildings, we will follow standard schedules, but there will be some operational adjustments to decrease the number of interactions. So as I mentioned earlier, LOC, so grades pre-K through 8, will remain in common groups to limit interactions, and then pending board approval, RFHS would like to recommend that we take advantage of the newly offered hybrid model for high schools, or hybrid only model for high schools, with TEA's most recently released guidance. Students would attend 2 days of the week and then remain virtual on the other 2 days, with the potential of a third day for students who might have additional needs.
Jessica, is the hybrid model that you're talking about for high school, that's for all high school students, or are you also offering 5 days a week for?
It would be, so the hybrid, the only campus that TEA is allowing us to offer a hybrid only model would be high school.
Okay, and that's what the district is considering and asking and going to be approaching the board about.
Yes.
Okay.
And this is really just about, our inability to decrease those interactions. There's really no way to do that with students having to make all those transitions. So if a child
Jessica,
is,
I just want to understand this. If you do hybrid for the high school, don't you still, by TEA recommend or mandate, still have to provide virtual learning for those high school kids too?
yes.
If they choose to.
Yes. Thank you for clarifying that. We will provide 100% virtual learning for all kids. If that will be an option for everyone. So that immediately does take some students out of the mix. But I will say at high school, it is not a very large percentage of kids. The majority of our high school parents were ready to send face-to-face. So bringing the hybrid model would have kids on 2 models. It would have kids on the hybrid only model, and then kids who are virtual only. So it would have 2. We would not have the 5 days a week on the table anymore at high school.
So should we also clarify that this is for high school classes and not just high school students? Because I feel like there's some middle school students who also go over to the high school. So wouldn't it just be more of the high school classes, not necessarily just high school students?
So Ms. Neath or Ms. Spears might chime in on that. When we have a student who's taking a high school course, and I'm thinking about like Algebra 1.
Algebra 1 and Theater Arts, the 2 classes that were offered at high school, we have now made room in our master schedule to do it on our campus. They will no longer need to go to high school for those high school classes.
Okay, thank you.
That's a good clarification. And then, as I've mentioned several times, we will release the health and safety protocols by the end of this week. That's our goal, is to get those out there. We know that that's an important thing. Staff is really wanting to see the detail of that, and we understand that as part of their concern. And so we will be releasing that pretty quickly. Food services, so curbside will be provided for virtual learners beginning with the first day of school, and it'll continue after the first 3 weeks. So we will continue with curbside food service. Elementary students will be served breakfast and lunch in classrooms to the extent possible. We really do believe that for the most part, Ms. Tran and Ms. Poland believe that they can facilitate students eating lunch in the classrooms while still giving teachers their 30-minute duty-free lunch. There may be a few exceptions, but we would just group maybe a couple of classes, or it wouldn't be putting a whole grade level in the cafeteria. Much more difficult to do that at secondary with the way that they run the schedule. So students would be served breakfast and lunch in the cafeterias, but it would be at reduced capacity. They would work to establish as many lunch groups as possible and maintain social distancing to the extent possible. So we would still be attempting to space students out, even though they would be in that cafeteria. Transportation, a lot of this is going to depend, some of this is going to depend on how many families need access to transportation. We are still encouraging families who can carpool or provide their own rides to do so for this limited time, just because the more we can reduce the number of students on buses, the more safe we can make the buses. That said, we've ordered electrostatic backpack misters to provide an efficient way to quickly sanitize buses frequently. We will have sanitation stations for each bus as students board. So before they get on, they will be sanitizing. Masks will be required on the buses. And then depending on the number of students, we will socially distance to the extent possible. Any questions on this one?
This is probably more of a Mr. Patek question, but I see that our food services workers are going to be clearly going back to work. Transportation and other support non-contract staff, what are we doing for them as far as paying them for these weeks that we are in virtual?
We'll have to discuss that because we've been focused on all the academic stuff. That's one thing that we didn't address yet. So we'll work on that, and then we'll get back to you.
Thank you. Yeah, that support staff is really important, and I'd hate to see them not being taken care of.
I believe, Norm, did you comment on this? I can't remember if it was Norm or Kathy that may have brought this up in conversations today.
I wasn't today, but we did talk about that all support staff would be on campuses on their contract, helping the teachers, even virtual, or the cafeteria ladies doing, they're cooking for curbside, or possibly going and helping at the campus if needed, the same with transportation. So we had talked about, and I don't know if that's changed, that all auxiliary staff will report to work on their normal, whatever their normal day was.
And it also came up that our paraprofessionals, we have things that they can do. Right now, there's so much going on with materials prep, with they're really, believe it or not, even with virtual learning, we find there are jobs we never knew existed. And so there are intentions for all of our hourly staff. The details of that will be, I think, lined out more specifically in the next weeks to come. But people are already trying to claim staff to be able to fulfill roles that need to be fulfilled at this time.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yes. So then what to expect next? Staff and student protocols, CDC I mentioned is releasing guidance, so we will keep ours in draft form while we're waiting to see what they put out. The enrollment registration link is live on ACISD's website homepage. It is bright yellow, and it is for our new enrollees and our returning. Remember that when you're going to update registration for your returning students, it's really just about making sure your information's updated. You don't have to start from scratch. We're working on a more robust COVID page on the website that's dedicated to keeping up with our outgoing communication. You probably know of the famous FAQs. Those get a little overwhelming. So we're going to shift that to a Q&A page on the COVID website, and it'll be divided by topics. So there will be like academics, probably extracurricular, health, and we'll start, populating that, and then we'll prompt you on Facebook to go check the website because we've updated, but we won't keep sending big, long FAQs out through email, through Proud Pirate. We definitely will put some more information about mental health, special program, lesson samples, and videos. So we'll continue to post links on the COVID website as we're building that. We do ask that you continue to submit questions to the Proud Pirate parent email address, and then watch for updates on those Q&As coming out. We are working, I think, on, I've been asking Thomas if we could get a little question button on the website so that parents can just click the question button and submit it, and that would just be one more way to get a question to us. So we're really trying to keep those lines of communication open. We know that silence is hard on people, so we recognize the need to have multiple avenues for you to be able to get your questions to us, staff and families. So this will be ongoing. Right now, there's been a whole lot of work dedicated to building this plane. And so that a lot of time has been spent on this, but we've tried to take your questions into consideration as we built the presentation for tonight. And we hope that you will continue to bring them through. I will say, because I have been slightly monitoring my text messages while I'm presenting, people are very curious about when we are doing the drawing of our 5 Walmart gift cards. And I promise you tomorrow, all those names will go into a digital spinner, and we will announce that on Facebook. And we'll make sure you get a phone call so that you get your $200 Walmart card. We hope that encouraged and inspired some folks to get on there and fill that out. We know some people have changed their minds. We know people are changing their minds. I want to say this to you, and I'm speaking on behalf of the campus principals, and I think they are okay with me doing this. We want your children in ACISD. We don't want them to go anywhere else. We believe our staff can take care of our kids the best. We know that some of you are wrestling with ideas and possibilities and things that you might be able to do, and we want you to do what's best for your family. But at the end of the day, we want you to know, just like we did when that crazy storm blew through our community, that what we want more than anything is to keep the ACISD family together. We don't want delays in instructing your kids. We want to keep them with us. We want them to see the faces of our ACISD staff. We know so many layers of what is going on and the heart that is in the people who work with your kids, your campus leaders, your district leaders. We want to be the ones that are here for you during this really wild and crazy time. And so we know that there are options out there. And so I would encourage you that if you are really trying to decide what's best for your family and you're trying to, kind of weigh the pros and cons of things, don't be afraid to reach out to your campus and talk to your principal. Don't be afraid to reach out and talk to, I'm available. Any of us, in this system are available to talk to you about what we can offer and how we can continue to support you. We will be making changes at different times throughout the year. And I know that's hard on people, but I believe that we can do it in a way that meets your needs and meets your kids' needs. And so if hearing tonight's presentation makes you change your mind and you say, I'd rather go virtual or I'd rather be face-to-face, we'll provide a new link for you to be able to report that information. We're not going to try to push you one direction or another. We want you to make the call that's best for you on that. We just want to be sure you have it. And we did have to add a slide to registration where there's a place for you to go ahead and commit one way or the other. And you'll see that probably that will be live tomorrow. So at this time, I'd love to take questions from the board, and we can always farm those out if someone else needs to answer, but that's what we've got in our presentation.